When you leave home to serve your country, the last thing you expect is for someone to rent out your house behind your back. But that's exactly what happened to me while I was deployed overseas. I trusted that everything would be safe and in order back home, especially with the HOA supposedly keeping an eye on things. Turns out, that trust was a huge mistake. A few weeks into my deployment, I started getting strange messages from neighbors. Some said they saw unfamiliar people coming in and out of my house. Others thought maybe I had rented it out. At first, I figured it was a misunderstanding, maybe a maintenance crew or something minor. But the more I heard, the more I realized something was seriously wrong. One neighbor even sent a photo of people moving furniture into my living room. That's when it hit me. Someone was living in my house, and I had no idea who they were. I hadn't signed any lease, hadn't given anyone permission, nothing. And the worst part? It was my own HOA that made it happen. They claimed they were managing the property since I was away, but I never authorized that. They had no right to touch anything, let alone rent it out. I was furious, but being thousands of miles away, I felt helpless. That is, until I told my unit. Let's just say, when you mess with a soldier's home, you don't just get a slap on the wrist. You get a coordinated response. Within 24 hours, we had a plan. And let's just say, it didn't take long before those illegal tenants were gone and my home was back under my control. But what we found inside the house after they left? That's a whole other story. So here's where things started to get even stranger. After the illegal tenants were removed and I finally got someone I trusted to check on the property, they told me the inside of the house was off. Nothing was broken or trashed, but it felt like someone had tried too hard to make it look normal. The furniture had been rearranged. My personal items, family photos, military awards, even my uniforms, were missing or boxed up in the garage, like they didn't belong there. It was like someone had tried to erase me from my own home. We started digging into who had been living there. Turns out the HOA had rented it out to a couple who claimed they signed a short-term lease through a third-party property manager. But here's the thing. I never hired any property manager. I never signed anything. And the HOA didn't have legal authority to act on my behalf, especially not without my written permission. The more I looked into it, the more it felt like this wasn't just a mistake. It was deliberate. I called the HOA's office, hoping it was some kind of error, some paperwork mix-up. But the answers I got were vague. One person claimed they thought I had abandoned the property since I'd been gone so long. Another told me they were just trying to help, keep the place from being a target. None of it made sense. I had informed them of my deployment. I had paperwork. They knew I was away on duty. That's when I started wondering, how many other military families had gone through this without even realizing it? Was this something they'd done before? And then we found something in the house that completely changed how I looked at the situation. Something that didn't belong. Something that raised way more questions than answers. When my friend opened the upstairs closet, they found something that didn't belong to me. An entire box filled with unopened mail, including official military documents and VA correspondence. Some of it had been opened, and some of it was missing entirely. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about someone squatting in my home. It was something deeper, maybe even criminal. I had trusted the HOA to follow the law, to respect my rights as a homeowner, and, frankly, as a deployed service member. But now it seemed like they had been going through my personal mail. That's a serious line to cross. What made it even more unsettling was that the people who had been staying there weren't just temporary renters. They had moved in like they planned to stay. Closets had their clothes. Bathroom drawers had their toiletries. There was even a dog bowl in the kitchen, despite my HOA having strict rules against pets. So somehow they not only moved people in without my permission, but they also bent their own rules to let them live more comfortably than I ever had there. I started reaching out to other homeowners in the neighborhood, quietly, just to feel things out. That's when I learned I wasn't the only one with stories. One neighbor said they caught someone touring their property while they were away on vacation. Another mentioned strange charges showing up on their HOA fees with vague descriptions, like property oversight. None of us had ever agreed to anything like that, and through all of this, the HOA board stayed silent. No emails. No return calls. Nothing. It felt like they were hiding something, maybe even protecting someone on the inside. The deeper I went, the more tangled it got. And I hadn't even told you yet what we found hidden behind the water heater. Behind. The water heater, tucked into a gap in the wall insulation, was a small black binder. It looked old, like it had been there a while, but when my buddy opened it, what we found inside was nothing short of chilling. Dozens of photocopies of homeowners' documents, leases, ID cards, deployment letters, even blank signature forms. Some had sticky notes with names, a few were labeled vacant or extended leave. And there, right on top, was a copy of my deployment orders, with a forged signature at the bottom, authorizing temporary property management. That was the moment everything clicked, and not in a good way. This wasn't some one-off accident. It looked like someone had been targeting military homeowners and others who were away for long stretches. The binder was like a playbook. Names, dates, timelines. It even listed when people were expected to return. Whoever put it together knew exactly what they were doing. It was calculated. Systematic. We didn't know who was behind it yet, but the fact that it had been hidden inside my own house, that hit hard. It meant my home wasn't just being used, it was part of something much bigger. And whoever did this wasn't just looking to rent out a place for some extra cash. They were taking advantage of people who couldn't defend themselves because they were overseas or out of town. I shared what we found with a couple other homeowners who had suspicions, and we decided to dig deeper together. One of them had a relative who used to work in real estate law. He looked over the lease agreements we'd recovered and immediately said something wasn't right. The documents weren't even legally binding. They were filled with errors and some looked like copy-paste jobs. We were getting close to something big. Too close, maybe. Because just days later, one of the homeowners who had been helping us got an anonymous letter on their doorstep. No return address. Just a single sentence. Inside, "You should stop asking questions." The letter shook everyone. Up to that point, we thought we were just exposing a shady operation. Something unethical, maybe illegal, but nothing dangerous. That changed overnight. The homeowner who got the note said they saw a car parked near their house late that evening. Headlights off, engine running. By the time they stepped outside, the car sped off. It was the first time any of us felt like we might actually be in danger for digging into this. Still, we weren't ready to back down. If anything, it made us more determined. I started documenting everything: photos, timestamps, emails, voice memos. We made backups and stored copies in multiple places. If something happened to one of us, we didn't want the evidence disappearing. With us? But then came the second twist, something none of us saw coming. One of the newer residents in the neighborhood reached out after hearing rumors about what we were uncovering. She asked if she could talk in private. When we met up, she handed me an envelope with a rental contract. It looked like the same fake agreement used in my house, same layout, same wording, but with one major difference: her lease was signed by the HOA president himself. Not a fake name, his actual signature. It was dated months before my deployment. This wasn't just the HOA turning a blind eye. It was someone at the very top pulling the strings. The resident also mentioned something that sent chills down my spine. Before she moved in, the HOA told her not to contact the homeowner directly. They said he was stationed in a secure location and couldn't be reached. They had built an entire story around my absence, like they'd planned it long. Before I ever left, at that point it was clear this wasn't just about my house anymore. It was bigger, more organized, and whoever was behind it had been doing it long enough to know exactly how to cover their tracks. But they made one mistake. They underestimated how far a group of determined homeowners and one very motivated soldier were willing to go. I knew I couldn't let it slide anymore. Between the tampered wiring and the weird notes, it had gone way past a petty dispute. So I did something I'd been avoiding. I filed a report. Not with the police, but with the HOA and the utility company. I figured it was safer to keep things quiet and official. I even handed over the footage of the person behind the garage and the message on my mailbox. The utility rep didn't say much, just nodded and said they'd look into it, but I could tell from his expression that he knew it was serious. A couple of days later, I noticed Karen's house was swarming with people. Not cops, but an inspection crew. Hard hats, tool belts, the whole deal. Turns out, someone had illegally tapped into a shared transformer box behind the property line, and it wasn't on my side. That's right. The juice her daughter had been pulling from my outlet? That was just a cover. The real theft had been going on underground, rerouting power straight from the grid. The decoy outlet I set up didn't fry her Tesla because it was pulling too much power. It did it because their DIY setup overloaded their side of the system. That's when everything clicked. The weird power surges, the frozen Tesla, the sudden silence before the knock. They weren't just stealing from me. They were siphoning electricity from the grid, likely trying to avoid the high charging costs. And they used my outlet as a decoy to make it look like that was the only thing in play. Within 24 hours of the inspection, the Tesla was gone from the driveway. So was the charger. Karen wouldn't even make eye contact anymore. But here's the final twist. About a week later, I got a knock again, this time in broad daylight. It wasn't Karen, it was her daughter. She handed me a small white envelope, muttered sorry, and walked off. Inside was a $500 prepaid power company card. No note, no explanation. But somehow, it said everything. I stood there for a while just holding the envelope, honestly not sure what to make of it. After everything, the stolen electricity, the tampered wiring, the weird late-night visits, it all ended with a quiet sorry and a prepaid card. No dramatic showdown, no screaming match, just silence. And honestly, I was okay with that. Used the card to cover my next power bill. And yeah, it felt kind of full circle. Karen and her daughter stopped parking near my property after that. The Tesla disappeared for good, and I noticed a different car in their driveway a few weeks later. Probably something that didn't need a charger or a hacked power line to keep running. What surprised me most was how fast the neighborhood moved on. People love drama until it's over, then suddenly it's like it never happened. But I learned a lot from the whole mess. Like how important it is to trust your gut when something feels off, and how quickly a small boundary, like an outlet, can turn into a much bigger problem when people don't respect it. The funniest part? That decoy outlet is still there. I left it installed as a reminder, not just for them, but for me. A reminder that it's okay to stand up for yourself, even if it makes things uncomfortable, and that sometimes the best way to deal with a Tesla-driving, power-stealing neighbor is with a little patience, some smart wiring, and a whole lot of keeping your cool. So yeah, it started with a Tesla, a charger, and a whole lot of nerve. But it ended with a quiet apology, a cleared bill, and peace of mind. And in the end, that was worth way more than the electricity they stole.